The wind moved like a restless spirit over the endless plains, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and dust. Beneath the fading glow of twilight rode Ms. Calhoun, a cowboy weathered by years of silence and solitude. His face was cut by lines of sun and sorrow, his hat shadowing eyes that had seen too much of both kindness and cruelty. He had learned the language of the land, the silence of deserts, the whisper of grass, the howl of wolves in midnight canyons. He lived as the frontier demanded, cautious, restless, never too close to anyone for too long. Yet in his heart lingered a memory, one he could neither bury nor forget, a story that began with a dying girl and returned years later in ways he could never have imagined. 15 years earlier, Amos had been wandering along the jagged edges of Apache territory. The air was brittle, the soil cracked, and the sun bore down with merciless weight. That was when he saw her. At first he thought her a shadow, a ghost left behind by some forgotten massacre. She lay at the bottom of a dry arroyo, little more than skin and bones wrapped in rags, her dark hair matted with dust. Her eyes, when they flickered open, were wide and hollow, too ancient for her tender age. She whispered her name, Karina, though her voice cracked like brittle twigs. She was no more than a girl of 14, abandoned, broken, and left to the desert's mercy. Amos dismounted slowly, wary, for the frontier had taught him suspicion. But when he saw the wounds on her arms, the bruises on her skin, and the tremble in her lips, his heart stirred against his better judgment. He could have left her, no law bound him to help. Yet something in her gaze, a fragile spark, a desperate plea, anchored his soul. With hands roughened by rope and reins, he lifted her gently, laid her in the scant shade of a mesquite, and poured water over her parched lips. She clung to life like a cactus clings to rain, and Amos decided then that he would not let her die. For 10 nights he kept her alive. For 10 nights he kept her alive. He cooked beans over a fire and broke jerky into small pieces she could swallow. He dressed her wounds with strips of his own shirt, whispering quiet reassurances, though words were not his trade. When coyotes prowled in the darkness, he drove them back with warning shots. When bandits came sniffing near, hoping to finish what they'd started, Amos stood tall, revolver in hand, and sent them fleeing into the hills. She watched him with wide eyes as if struggling to believe that anyone would shield her, and in those eyes Amos saw a reflection of something he had long forgotten. Trust. As her strength returned, so too did her spirit. By the 10th sunrise she stood on her own, shoulders straight though her frame was thin. "Why?" she asked him one evening, her voice quiet beneath the stars. Amos shrugged, poking at the fire. "Because you were there," he said. She tilted her head, studying him, and whispered, "I will not forget." When she left, walking eastward toward the faint hope of her people, Amos felt a strange ache in his chest. He wanted to call her back to promise her safety beside him. But he was a drifting man with no home to give. He watched her vanish into the desert, swallowed by horizon and silence. Though he rode on, the memory clung to him like a shadow. The years rolled by, grinding men into dust. Amos grew older, his hair silvering at the edges, his steps slower. Yet he never forgot Karina, the girl with haunted eyes who had walked away with a promise on her lips. He wondered if she had survived, if the desert had claimed her, if his kindness had mattered at all. But Karina had not been lost. She found her people, and they found in her something fierce. She rose from the ashes of her childhood and became more than a survivor. She learned the songs of the Apache, the art of moving like wind across the land, the strength of a warrior's arm, and the wisdom of an elder's heart. In her voice grew authority, in her gaze resolve. She remembered Amos with a reverence that shaped her path, believing that kindness, even in the face of cruelty, was a power greater than fear. Over years, she became a leader, uniting her people beneath the weight of her vision. One night, long after Amos had given up hope of ever seeing her again, the silence of the plains was broken by a sound that set his blood stirring. He was camped by a low fire, the stars glittering like cold steel above him. When he heard it, the beat of drums, distant but growing. Then came the thunder of hooves, a storm rolling across the earth. He stood, hand at his revolver, his heart steady though his bones ached. Out of the darkness rode a host of warriors, Apache riders clad in leather and feathers, their faces painted, their eyes burning with purpose. And at their head was Karina. She dismounted with grace, no longer the fragile girl of his memory, but a woman of undeniable strength. Her braids swung against her shoulders, her eyes sharp as obsidian, her bearing regal. Behind her, the warriors held formation, silent, waiting for her command. She stepped toward Amos, her voice carrying in the still night. "You saved me once." Amos tipped his hat, the firelight catching the lines on his face. "You remember?" "I could not forget," she said. "Because of you I lived. Because of you I had the chance to grow, to lead, to protect my people. Now I have returned, not as the girl you sheltered, but as the woman who commands these riders, and I bring them not for vengeance, but for justice." She told him of the danger, settlers and mercenaries driving deeper into Apache land, treaties broken, families scattered, graves desecrated. The railroad sought to carve its path through sacred valleys, backed by men with rifles and greed in their eyes. "We do not wish for war," she said, "but we will not surrender what is ours. You know these men, their ways, their words. Ride with me, Amos. Guide us. Stand as you once stood." At dawn, the valley filled with tension. The settlers arrived with wagons, rifles gleaming, faces set in grim lines. Amos rode out alone at first, his hat low, his horse steady. Across from him stood the leader of the settlers, a thick-set man with cold eyes and a sneer. "You stand with them?" He spat. Amos said nothing, only glanced toward the ridges. There, hidden among rocks and brush, Karina's warriors waited, silent as shadows. The settlers demanded surrender. Karina stepped forward, her voice rising like a storm. She spoke of promises broken, of land stolen, of lives trampled under the boots of greed. She bared the scars on her arms, proof of the violence inflicted upon her people. The settlers muttered, uneasy beneath her gaze. Then came the sharp crack of a rifle. One shot, wild and reckless, splitting the morning air. Dust exploded near Amos's boots. For a breath, the valley held its breath. But Karina had given orders. Her warriors did not break. They stood poised, ready, yet restrained. The settlers, seeing themselves surrounded not by savages, but by disciplined fighters led by a woman of fire and dignity, faltered. Their rifles wavered, lowered. The sneer on their leader's face cracked into unease. The weight of justice pressed down heavier than bullets. When the settlers withdrew, grumbling but subdued, the valley breathed again. The sun climbed higher, bathing the land in gold. The Apaches stood unbroken, their pride unshaken. At their head was Karina, tall and resolute, and beside her was the cowboy who had once saved a dying girl. Amos looked at her with quiet wonder. "I didn't reckon you'd come back like this," he murmured. She smiled faintly. "You gave me life. I only returned it." As her riders turned toward the hills, Amos watched with something close to awe. He realized that what he had given so many years ago had not been lost to the dust. It had grown, it had flourished, it had returned with the force of destiny. The girl he had saved had become a leader, her people an army, her heart unyielding. And Amos, old and weary, rode on beneath the vast sky with the knowledge that even in a land of cruelty and lawlessness, one act of kindness could echo across generations. Mercy, he thought, was stronger than steel. And legends are born not from power alone, but from the moments when a man chooses compassion over indifference. The cowboy who once sheltered a forgotten Apache girl had lived to see her return with warriors at her back and the fire of destiny in her eyes. That was a story the plains would carry long after the last hoofbeat faded into silence.